I think I kind of want to look over some Mace stuff for the Warrior, right? So we're gonna talk about it for a second, and then I'll probably end the stream, come back, and restart it here in a minute. Doing this though, I want to. I don't know if I already have them pulled up or not. Yeah, so we got Warrior skills. So the first thing is when we look at this, to kind of check and see where the Mace is lying when it comes to scaling. I wish the damage scaling was on the front of this. But you can see like the Great Sword auto attacks, they get 0.8, which is the same as the Mace, right? This one's 1.5 and 1.5. So a little bit more than the Mace on the second part of this chain. With 100 blades, really, this is the main damage potential of the Great Sword for the most part. And you can see it has 4.62 on here with a 1.21 at the end. I don't think they have like base damage numbers realistically on here though. Like this one says 488. Um, like arcing slice base damage is 807 with a 2 times to a 3 times. It's basically a final thrust. But like when we look at the hammer stuff, it almost has a 1 damage scalings with 136. But we also need to look at these the attack times if they're on here. So whole sequence takes 2.25 seconds. We have dual shot 1.05, 1.19 seconds. I kind of wish that attack speed increase that you can get for warriors was whenever you have both hands in use. So fire a shot at your target, gain might if you strike a vulnerable foe. 1 damage scaling. Attack speed is 0.96 per attack, which is actually faster than the longbow, which is actually pretty impressive. Um, which is weird because the rifle seems like it seems like it attacks pretty slow, but it might just be because the damage scaling. With the bow, it's a little bit slower, but it shoots 2 projectiles at once, whereas the rifle pierces. Now we go into the chop. So this one's at point 0.7 with 257. The whole sequence takes 3.6 seconds. Got double chop with 1.5. You get 2 auto attacks with it. And you got triple chop, which has the biggest damage increase for the axe. Yeah, triple chop is the big one. But with axe, the issue with triple chop is that you have to be next to your target, and you can see that the range is only 130. So you have to keep onto your target. And now when we go to mace, we got 0.8 with a 300 base damage here. Whole sequence takes 2.9 seconds, so a little bit faster than the axe, but still has some other things going on for it. 0.8 is kind of low compared to most things, and it's 0.8 on all of these for the most part. However, pulverize is a 1.6, so it is fairly strong for what it does. Still 3 targets, but the big one with the mace is that you're getting this endurance regeneration and the 50% fumble. So basically, if you have like a power warrior and like with a great sword and a mace face off, um, you're going to be able to continuously apply weakness just with your auto attack. However, you will be attacking at about 3 seconds speed compared to, say, let's just go with the greatsword auto attack, a 2.4 second speed, right? Now, what other benefits does a mace have? Well, you have counter blow, which blocks the next attack and counter with an attack if you're in melee range. I don't think this is as strong as the sword offhand, because on the sword offhand, you can actually block and get quite a lot out of it, if we're going to be completely honest. Um, but this does give you a hefty amount of adrenaline. It does block a melee attack. Thinking on it at the moment, if we're running a condition build like I am right now, it might be beneficial for me to actually run sword, sword, mace, shield instead of mace, mace, sword, shield. Purely because I would then get access to 3 blocks instead of just 1 block. And since I normally apply weakness on my burst skills, this would also allow me to reflect projectiles. Even though this one might only block 1 projectile, the sword block can actually work like a shield stance, and shield stance is 3 seconds of block, so that's all pretty strong. But when it comes to the mace, like this counter blow has a 2 damage scaling and applies vulnerability. So the mace isn't like the best, most powerful weapon the warrior has access to, but it does give you vulnerability. You can get like 20 stacks pretty quickly and consistently on it, and it does give you might, which is pretty good. Now, I think it's possibly one of those weapons where, yes, it's good with crowd control, so if you're fighting people with crowd control, but I also think that it's one of those warrior weapons like the rifle that are better when you're in groups. So if you have a group of warriors using this, you can stun lock people, you can easily just apply AoE weakness and might generation, like a crazy amount of might generation if you really want to, right? And then so we go to Pommel Bash. Daze your foe with a brutal Pommel Bash. If you strike a foe that is using a skill, gain barrier. So the barrier is pretty good. It says brutal Pommel Bash, but it's not like anything serious. The damage isn't very high. So how would you get the most benefit out of the weapon is the real question. Like Crushing Blow gets 1.5. So really, like the Counter Strike and the Crushing Blow have like some of the highest damage numbers on it. They also apply the vulnerability. And then Tremor is still a point 0.8 with a 3 second knockdown, but it is also a physical projectile. So if you and your warrior buddies happen to be able to remove boons and have an unblockable attack, you could knock people down for quite a long period of time. It has a really good range, stuff like that. But pretty interesting to note. So, how would we try to get the most benefit out of the skull or the mace? I mean, there's a few options it seems. Like this one, you even get a 1.5 on this burst skill, the stun. The thing with this is that you can basically either charge up the mace skill to get more stun duration, or you can just use the base mace skill to get more damage and that 1 second stun. So, which makes me think that you're actually supposed to use the mace as a, let's say, hybrid weapon. Because there's a couple of things here. On one hand, the mace is doing like 20% to like 70% less damage than most of the other stuff that you see in the game.
You can never have too much treasure. What do you need?
Right? So they have skills like Merciless Hammer, which causes your hammer and mace skills to deal increased damage when striking a disabled or defiant foe, and then you gain adrenaline when you disable a foe. So if you use Merciless Hammer, you're going to gain a bunch of adrenaline when it comes to using your mace because you're just every auto attack. I mean, even if we spec this right now and we come outside, you see that we can do just 2 auto attacks and then we're straight into a stun. So it allows you to get all of these off a lot quicker. We're still going with lesser pain because we want that damage resistance on my build. But you can see that we can go Shield Master and reflect projectiles, and we can get up to 3 of these if we want to go Sword, Sword, Mace, Shield. But running Merciless Hammer, you're going to get that 20% damage increase, which is going to put your hammer or your mace skill a little bit higher up on the bar. And then if you wanted to get more damage out of it, you could go Berserker's Power, but it's not the biggest thing. The thing with this is that if you have people that give you quickness or you got a bunch of boon removal, Berserker's Power can give you more damage. Might Makes Right can give you a lot more healing and endurance generation. Brave Stride, I mean, for the sword, it's going to help quite a bit. The rest of it isn't the biggest thing. But Aggressive Onslaught. So you gain quickness when you disable an enemy. While you have quickness, your movement speed is increased. So with the mace, you're going to be able to get the 25% movement speed increase pretty consistently, as well as this quickness bonus. But it doesn't really go super high. You might get like 6 seconds, and it'll just keep resetting 6 seconds with Aggressive Onslaught. But the way I look at this is that when you look at Berserker's Power, it's better for burst damage type weapons like rifle, axe, great sword can still be good with it. Anything that has really high damage scaling or like attack speed or can hit multiple targets. The mace is mainly just like a single target attack. Its power scaling isn't super high. You know, so there's not a whole lot that you can really think of when you do this. And it's 21% damage. The other thing is that the mace has a very low attack speed. So when you're looking at the attack speed, the mace has a 3-second cooldown, which means that even though you're getting the 21% damage increase, your scaling isn't super high to begin with. And then your attack speed is really low. So unless you're doing like a really serious burst, this isn't the biggest deal. However, Aggressive Onslaught, when you gain quickness, 50% faster attack speed, means that if you're taking 3 seconds to do an auto attack chain, it'll drop down to 5. But if you're taking like a warrior sword, for instance, sword shield, if it takes a second to do 3 auto attacks, it'll go down to 0.5, which is still impressive, but it isn't as big of a drop, you know? Even like the axe skill at like 2.4, it's going to drop down to like 1.2, whereas the mace is going down to 1.5. The great sword, I don't even remember what it was at the second. I'm assuming it was probably like 2 seconds. It'll go down to like 1 second. So that's kind of a big deal. But that means that you're pretty close to where they're at, which gives you a second option. So the other option that you have is say that you take, was it Discipline? No. I mean, the Burst Mastery would be good for Discipline. Like, all right, let's just talk about this for a second. If you interrupt somebody with your mace and you get this quickness, which gives you this 25% movement speed buff, this movement speed buff stacks with other movement speed buffs. So you can get this burst skill that does more damage, and then you get more movement speed. That 3 seconds of swiftness, you could get that up with boon duration. And then you have this warrior sprint, which runs faster while wielding melee weapons and deal increased strike damage while you have swiftness. So you could do this and get a 25% movement speed bonus, but I don't believe this stacks. Whereas the aggressive onslaught does stack. So if you were to use something like this and you had swiftness, you still get a pretty hefty movement speed bonus. Okay? But the other thing is if you come to, was it arms? The dual wielding. So you get this 20% attack speed increase if you're wielding a main hand weapon in your offhand. So with the sword, for instance, you could go sword shield or sword sword. And with the sword sword, you could potentially run like a physical trait that would give you this quickness generation here. So you do 1 second on your sword auto attack, it goes down to 0.5, and then you're getting like another 20%, so you might go down to like 0.4. But with this mace, you're getting 50% increased attack speed. So let's say that you go down to like 1.5 seconds, and then we go like 1.5. So you're getting down to like 1.2, something like that. So with dual wielding, you're going to be more on par with the sword auto attack. So you take Sundering Burst, and you go Signet of Might and get you some unblockable attacks. Or you can, I mean, you're not immobilizing a foe, but if this was stuns or immobilizes or whatever, this would give you massive amounts of adrenaline gain. We also have a bunch of traits we can do here, but I think the unblockable would be the best. All right. So you see how you can get enough might generation and everything. And that's going to be the next part. So you see, if you have higher armor, you're going to continuously be able to keep weakness on target, which is just going to slowly whittle down their endurance and whittle down their damage that they do to you. So it isn't just that the mace is doing less damage than the other weapons. It also makes the other weapons do less damage consistently, which means you don't have to trait weakness if you don't want to. And the other thing is that you'll see with my build that we didn't really have anything in here that gives us might generation, but we had high stacks of might on our character. We have reckless impact, but you see, if I go and I take this merciless hammer and I stick it up and I do my defensive traits again, I'm going to keep aggressive onslaught. We have body blow, which this is where I think the mace can kind of come into its own, because like the sword, you're doing a little bit less damage, but the sword applies bleeds on auto attack, which is pretty important because that means like if a sword versus an axe go together, they do similar damage on the first 3 autos, but the sword will do more with condition damage and can actually do more damage over a greater period of time than the axe would. But the axe has higher burst damage and total damage early. So like the first 3 autos are pretty on par, and then after that, you're losing, quite a lot of damage on the sword. The axe gets the triple chop, but it takes like 2.4 seconds. The sword gets all 3 auto attack chains at 1.2 seconds. But the third auto attack on the sword cripples, which allows them to move around the axe user. So if everything's equal, the sword should be able to outplay the axe just by auto attack chaining, because the axe doesn't have any tools to necessarily deal with the sword. Um, right. So the next thing that we got with Berserker, you can actually do quite a lot here. So you get a little bit of bleed on your stuff. When you enter Berserker, you can see you get bleed for 8 seconds, confusion, blindness, which means, this is a fairly capable condition-based weapon if you really want to. Which isn't too bad. Fairly capable condition-based weapon. But where the sword applies conditions that last a little bit less time and do a little bit more damage, maybe, the mace applies the body blow, which affects weakness, which means all of your interrupts now apply weakness, which means you're going to be taking less damage from your enemy and reducing their endurance regeneration, which is very important for fighting power-based builds. Um, if you keep that weakness on there and they're focusing on endurance regeneration, vigor, and all that stuff, this is pretty powerful. But you see the bleeding is 12 seconds, and it's doing almost 70 damage. Where the sword, it's 6 seconds doing like 34 damage. So if you're doing a 9-second rotation on your character, and here for instance, I don't think Fear Me is going to be counted as, we can check it here in a second, but you're going to get at least 3 procs of bleed on this rotation, as well as stacks of vulnerability, potentially a knockdown, potentially additional bleed or confusion here, which opens up doors and possibilities armor-wise where you can use confusion traits and confusion armor on your warrior, which doesn't have access to that much confusion. I would like there to be more confusion on this bar, actually, but, you know, that's just it, because it would be really good versus, like, tanky compositions. But with this Condi build-wise, when you look at our armor, on this one I'm using Trailblazer. So I'm basically doing my Celestial armor set that's hybrid damage, which would work perfectly fine for the Mace combo. However, instead of doing power and Condi and trying to balance it out because Mace has less scaling than the other weapons, sort of, um, kind of, sort of, we're going full Condi. And instead of doing burning, we're doing interrupts and stuns, essentially, is what's going on. Just want to double check the sword real quick. Yeah. So the sword and the mace have fairly similar scaling on their auto attacks. But the mace has less damage on the rest of its skills. So if they're both auto attack based weapons, like what exactly is going on here? Well, the plan is you're going to stack up conditions with your sword, and then you'll swap over to your mace, which is going to apply those 20-second bleeds and stun people in place. And in mass numbers, you'd get more stuns off, which would be better. But you can also do more attack speed or whatever. But if we look at the runes, we're using the runes of the aristocracy. So starting the game, especially like early on, if you get like dire armor, which is very cheap, so you get health, armor, and you get condition damage, you can run a sword shield mace combo. And then aristocracy runes are like some of the first runes that you get from Claudius's Manor, like one of the beginning dungeons. So you can get this fairly easily, and it's going to give you 5 stacks of might every time that you inflict weakness on a foe. Okay? So if you look over a bunch of different builds, um, Greatsword can proc a lot of might generation with the sigil and for the Greatsword trait. So you can get like 4 to 5 might or whatever a second, maybe, which is pretty good. An axe, especially a berserker axe, you can do this same armor set if you wanted to for the 5 stacks of might, and every time that you apply or use decapitate, you'll get 10 might. So you can potentially get more might using axe than you could greatsword, just repeatedly using decapitate over and over again, but it's single target damage. All right. Now with the mace, you're gonna get 5 might for each of these skills basically. So you get 1, 2, 3, so you get 15, and then every time you auto attack chain, which we already said that since we're using quickness, we're getting basically a 1.5, 1.4 second auto attack chain, which is pretty respectful. And we're going to be getting 5 might for that. So we're going to be a little bit faster than just a normal greatsword. And we're going to get 5 might per chain. So that's 1 second, a little bit over 1 second auto attack chain for 5 might. Now, the only difference there is that we will not be getting, we won't be getting the benefits of the forceful greatsword. I mean, if we were to build precision, you could spec forceful greatsword, but I wouldn't expect to get much more might out of it. I mean, this is always 50% chance to get crit. I wish it was 100 for all weapons, but it's whatever. 50% chance. With Mace, it would probably still be okay. You get a little bit more stuff going on. But the benefit is that with the Mace, you might be getting less total might generation, potentially. But you're getting this constant weakness. And then when we look at like the damage calculations for weapon damage and stuff, it's like your physical damage on your weapon times like whatever modifiers and stuff divided by the enemy's armor. So if you look at like our build here, where we have I forget what this is called now, Trailblazer gear. Our base toughness is 2,771, and our armor is 3,287. But when you look at the weapons, most of these, they're just like 1,100, right? So basically, if you have 1,100 armor, because the greatsword's like 1,100, if we go over here, 1,100. When you have 1,100 armor, you're negating all of the base damage on the greatsword for the most part. And then it's all about their damage increases. So everything with the greatsword and power builds, they're multiplying their damage. So if you're negating their weapon damage, basically there, then it comes down to their crit damage, and then it comes down to their percentage multipliers after that. So if you have at least 1,100 armor, you're going to be able to negate most of, if all, their damage from their main weapon stats. And then if you have, 3,000 armor, you're probably going to be able to negate a good chunk of their power. So let's say they have 3,000 power. We're going to be able to negate 3,000 of that power in their combination. But then their crit damage can go up to 200, 300%. So that's going to give them a lot of damage increase. But if you're doing a physical damage build, or if you have if you're doing physical damage mace or whatever on this, you can replace Fear Me for balanced stance, and you can get immunity to critical hits. So when you get immunity to critical hits, you're going to negate all of their ferocity stacks. All their ferocity bonuses are going to be pretty much void. and you're already negating the bulk of their power. So at that point, you're basically going to be taking very minimal damage, if any, which means that if you're running a damage negation kind of setup like I have here, where you're going to be taking pretty much 0 damage the whole time, uh, balanced stance actually starts to become more viable when you have the higher amounts of armor, because you're going to be reducing their damage by quite a lot. The third part of it's just like basic boosting that they can get damage wise, which is going to be like Berserker's Power or anything like that. But against a high defense build, it's not going to get through damage immunity in the first place. And then the balanced stance and all of this is just there to basically reduce the damage that you take while your defensive skills are down. And at that point, you got to look at if you're going so damage build wise, like a great sword, they're going to do more total damage to the enemies around them as a solo player. But if you have a tankier build like this, they're going to be able to do equal or more damage 1v1 against those power builds, because all of their stats, the precision and ferocity stats, become wasted, and then you're going to have more total health and armor. So it mainly just comes down to if they can actually kill you, or if they can heal enough to not die. So while the soldier gear and sentinel gear doesn't seem super powerful, the real strength of the gears is that if you're able to fight people and do things that mitigate their damage and make their stats less useful, then you're actually doing more total damage than they are in a fight. And then your health gives you enough pull to survive basically between your damage immunity rotations, or to kind of soak up condition damage long enough to survive. That's kind of the biggest point that I can make with that. Um, but the mace, you can see now we're going to be getting a lot of stacks of weakness, which we can put into Might Makes Right to get more health regeneration, or we can go into Aggressive Onslaught, which is going to give us more quickness and more might generation, which is pretty good. So let's do Might Makes Right, and then every time that we interrupt a foe or whatever, we're going to be applying a bleed, weakness, and get might generation, which isn't too bad. But realistically, if you don't increase your percentage damage with the mace and you don't increase your stun duration, body blow I think is really powerful in the fact that you're going to be getting those bleeds off, because you're going to get at least 3 of these 12-second bleeds. If you go for like bleed duration runes or anything like that, you can get this up to like 20 seconds. So this is going to add up for a long duration bleed effect. But the big thing is if you're in a group of players, you're going to get a big reduction in the overall physical damage and energy regeneration of the enemies. And you're going to be able to get quite a lot of might generation and stuff as well. You can also run tactics if you don't want to do Might Makes Right, but you'll lose your bleeding on this. But if you do that, you're going to be able to generate a lot of might for your allies. So for like a PvP type thing, I would probably still like Shake It Off for the most part for the condition removal. But if you did manage to kind of keep your condition removal down, or you can take Cleansing Ire and you'll lose 1 second and your vigor regeneration on all your stances. But if you take balance stance, you're going to get 4 seconds of crit damage immunity. So if your defense stats are high enough, it really shouldn't matter whether or not you have that 1 more second of damage immunity on these other skills. It will matter in like a big mass scale fight like World v World, but your damage reduction and extra health, if you happen to be going Sentinels or you happen to be going like Dire Gear, should be enough to keep you alive, or at least reduce a bulk of the damage. So it shouldn't take much to keep you going at that point. And also, I mean, you're still going to have 12 seconds of damage immunity, and then 3 seconds of block, and all that other good stuff. So, it's not too bad. But I'm just saying that when you have body blow, that's what's going to mitigate or kind of help your damage on your mace a bit more, because these cooldowns, like 10 seconds and 25 seconds, they're not that bad, and you're going to be able to kind of do a lot of damage on that. And if we end up going sword, sword, and mace shield, you also get the benefits of the mace shield. Even if you lose out on the even if you lose out on the trimmer and the extra vulnerability that you get here. Any case, I'm gonna hop off here on this one, and we'll restart and start doing the other stream. So, you guys have a good one. Try out the mace. Try out some combinations with it. I think it could still be pretty decent. You guys have